You are listening to The Memory Keeper by Evan Vaile. Chapter 6.
Clutching her handbag more tightly, Carol Kenny merged with the throng of commuters sweeping down the concrete stairs which led into the underground train station. As she progressed, the dry artificial light of the subway washed away the gathering evening darkness of the world above. Newspaper stands and cafes lined the interior of the train station, and her ears filled with the echo of hundreds of people hastening to and fro. Soon, the crowd began to form into queues as it approached the turnstiles and uniformed ticket inspectors. Carol fished through her handbag and found her train ticket. She smiled at one of the staff members, an elderly gentleman whom she had gotten to know over the past few years. He waved at her as she swiped her ticket at the gate. "Hi, Benny," she said, still moving. The press of commuters behind her kept her moving along. "Working late, Carol?" he asked, a kindly smile crinkling his face. "Too late," she sighed. "Tell me about it," he lamented, but his grin belied his tone. "I'll see you tomorrow," she said, and continued into the train station. Carol began to hurry now, not wanting to miss the next train. She descended down one escalator, then another, until she stood on the lowest platform. This far underground, she always felt just a little uncomfortable. Armed robbery never entered her mind. It was the claustrophobia of the place. So many people squashed onto a long and narrow platform with only two sluggish escalators leading to the surface. God forbid there ever be an earthquake, or an accident, or an explosion. A small shiver rippled down Carol's spine at that possibility. She moved forward. The crowd melted away on either side and found space for her. Then she stood silently, distant in her thoughts, absently watching the dark hole at the far end of the tunnel from which the train was scheduled to emerge in 4 minutes. A gentle bump from behind broke her reverie, and she stepped aside to admit more people onto the platform. With the knife still clenched between his teeth, Ratboy scurried through the ventilation ducts on his hands and knees, shoving the lifeless body of Zephyr in front of him. A dark trail of blood continued to ooze from the remains of Zephyr's head, a thick red streak that glowed faintly in the half-light. His progress through the ducts was illuminated by splinters of light from surrounding tunnels which led to rooms and corridors and cells and other feeding rooms. Ratboy avoided the light. He wrapped himself in the safety of darkness and sought openings which promised ascent, to the surface, to freedom. His eyes quickly grew accustomed to the darkness. As he scampered from one tunnel to the next, he began to understand the layout of the ventilation system. Every 10 meters, a new duct would branch off the main line. If it went up, he followed it. Sometimes, the adjoining ducts were vertical shafts above his head, several feet wide. If he could stand and hoist Zephyr's dead weight onto the next level, he did. His nasty little fingers clawed into Zephyr's body, and soon its clothes were shredded and hanging in tatters from its lifeless limbs. Ratboy tore off a piece of the blue material and wiped the sweat from his eyes. Though he had no way of knowing it, within 5 minutes of his escape into the ducts, Ratboy had ascended to the uppermost levels of the facility. Beyond this lay the last meters of the ducts and then the subway tunnels of the underground train station. Ratboy suspected that he was nearing his objective when the tunnels began to broaden until they were high enough for him to stand and drag the body along. Soon, he could feel the surface. He could actually feel it. And with the jolt of adrenaline that this realization brought, his pace quickened. The train, speeding through the subway over his head, grew louder with every step he took, an awesome roll of thunder that he could almost reach up and touch with his fingertips. Breathing heavily from his exertions, he adjusted his grip on Zephyr's ankles and slowed his pace for a second. Suddenly, his ears detected a noise behind him, and he paused, holding his breath and standing deathly still. Far away, somewhere in the depths of the ventilation system, he could hear the rhythmic beat of several people moving through the air conditioning ducts. Guards, certainly, he decided. They were coming for him. Tightening his grip on the body, he hurried forward. His eyes fell to the trail of red behind him. His passing through the dusty ventilation ducts was marked by the crimson line of blood left in his wake, extending all the way back to feeding room 5. Ratboy wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, but even he could determine that the blood would guide his pursuers through the maze of ducts and straight to him. The thought that the guards would have him before he completed his mission was too much to bear. His hands trembled with fury, and he paused to consider what to do. The guards tracking him would be inured to the blood trail now. They would follow it thoughtlessly. Could he use that to his advantage? In the darkness, his eyes narrowed as a plan began to form in his mind. Still gripping the knife tightly between his teeth, he looked at the blood and the body, and at the clean length of tunnel that stretched off into the distance. Above his head was a vertical shaft which he was sure he could climb carrying Zephyr with him. Decided on a course of action, he moved quickly. He hurried down the tunnel, passing by several adjoining ducts, making sure that Zephyr was still leaving a trail of blood on the ground. 30 meters along the passageway, he stopped and dumped the body on the ground. Zephyr must have been emptied of most of his blood by that stage, but there was still some red fluid seeping out of his skull. The brain contains 25% of the body's blood supply, and that had left a tidy trail for the guards to follow. Gripping the knife determinedly in his hand, Ratboy hacked away at Zephyr's neck, slicing through tendon and bone. The grisly job was made easier by the trauma Zephyr had suffered post-mortem, and Ratboy sang softly as he worked. The Deacons connected to the Ratboy connected to the Zephyrs connected to the... He stopped, listening carefully. The guards were closer now. He could hear their footsteps. He surmised that they would be moving faster than him because they weren't carrying a body. He continued his work steadily, picking up his lyric where he'd left off. The Zephyrs connected to the duct fan. The duct fans connected to the signal wire. The signal wires connected to the train crash. Suddenly, Zephyr's shaved, crushed head was free of the body. Ratboy held it up by an ear, examining it closely, all the while singing under his breath. He grinned at his dead enemy. Then he quietly put it down and, slipping the bloodied knife back between his teeth, used both his hands to invert Zephyr and empty out the remnants of the blood from the decapitated body. He held onto the ankles and shook the body like a rag doll until the last drip had fallen from the fleshy remains of the neck. Then he stripped off his blue sleeveless shirt and tied it securely over the body's neck as best he could, to stem the flow of any more blood that was left in the visceral organs. Satisfied with his efforts, and glad that the body was a little lighter now that the blood had been drained from it, he tucked Zephyr under his arm like a surfboard and hastened back the way he had come, taking care not to leave any telltale signs of his deception. Behind him lay the crimson trail leading to the shocked face of Zephyr in a pool of blood, staring up from the stainless steel floor of the passageway. With his shirt off, Ratboy looked trim and muscular. He returned to the vertical shaft and thrust the body up onto the next level. A train roared past in the subway tunnel somewhere overhead, and Ratboy smiled to himself. Then he wrapped his fingers around the topmost edge of the shaft and disappeared into the dark hole. 50 meters behind, the three guards cautiously made their way forward, hunched over, their torches trained on the crimson trail at their feet. Their faces were obscured by their goggles and helmets, and they held their shotguns tightly with sweaty, gloved hands. Watkins led them. Like all the guards, he had a certain shallow courage when he was in his element, back in the isolation cells or in the feeding rooms. But here, in the dark of the tunnels, there was a little jelly in his knees. The inmates weren't meant to be able to escape, were they? He'd been told that that was an impossibility. He wasn't trained for this. He was trained to handle the subjects in the cells or the feeding rooms. He moved fearfully, shining his torch up every gloomy vertical shaft. When the guards began to tire, they kept their heads down and stuck doggedly to the slick red line that led into the darkness. Watkins' radio crackled. "What's going on?" barked the director. "Have you got him yet?" "Still following the blood trail, sir," Watkins whispered into his radio. He flashed his torch beam further forward and saw a shape in the distance. The three guards slowed and approached hesitantly. "Stand by, there's something up ahead." With all three torch beams trained on Zephyr's head, his crazy eyes blazed like diamonds. Watkins stood over the severed head before playing his torch around the immediate area. The trail of blood stopped where they were standing. "Shit!" one of the other guards gasped when he realized what the battered shape in the pool of blood was. He stumbled away a few steps and vomited. "What was that?" The director snapped through the radio. "It's ahead, sir," Watkins replied, with sang-froid he didn't feel. "What?" the director asked, confused. "Did you say it's up ahead?" Watkins swallowed the lump in his throat and glanced at his vomiting colleague. With the blood trail ended, the darkness suddenly seemed much more menacing. He was no longer certain that their quarry was in front of them. "No, it's a head, sir," he replied. "It's Zephyr's head. I can't see his body anywhere, though." The radio crackled again. "Any sign of Ratboy?" Watkins pointed his torch into the dark. "No." "Keep following the trail, then," the director ordered. "The trail stops here, sir," Watkins explained. "The rest of the duct is clean. He must have doubled back on us." The guard who had thrown up was wiping his mouth with the back of his gloved hand. "Jesus, he's behind us?" he exclaimed, madly waving his torch back down the tunnel. Watkins felt the cold sweat trickle down his own chest. "He could have gone down any of the passageways we passed. There's no telling where he is now." "God damn it," the director swore. Any semblance of calm in his voice had disappeared. "Then backtrack and see if you can determine where he went. He's dragging a body full of blood, so he must have left a trail for you to follow." In the air-conditioned comfort of the control room, the director was sweating too. His officers were all standing around uselessly, while one of the program's most disagreeable inmates was effecting some cunning plan. "Come on, you idiots, seconds count. Can't you come up with anything?" The director almost screamed. With startling clarity, he saw his error in hiring only yes men for personnel. He glared at them all in disgust. His engineers, however, still seemed to have their wits about them. Turning to the bearded man reading the schematic, the director snapped, "How many termination points are there in the ventilation system?" The engineer adjusted his glasses. 18, he said finally. "Christ," the director muttered. "What if we send guards to block them all? That way, Ratboy can scamper through all the passageways he wants, but eventually we'll get him. All we have to do is keep him underground, right?" "We could," the engineer agreed, "but it won't change anything." The director glared at him and growled, "Why not?" "Because no matter which termination point Ratboy chooses, he's probably already there by now," the engineer explained. "But he can't get out, right?" the director persisted. "I mean, all he's got is a corpse and a kitchen knife. Even if he can stop the fan, he can't cut through the reinforced steel bars." "Right," the engineer replied. "But I don't think he's going to try and do that. He's beaten the system and he knows it. I don't think he's going to waste this opportunity." "Then what's he going to do?" the director screamed. The engineer's eyes left the schematic and stared off at some point far away. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's too late for us to stop him."
That is the end of this chapter. To listen to the next chapter on YouTube or to purchase the digital ebook from Amazon, see the links in the description.